Welcome to the Monsters Among Us podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 23, the Kecksburg UFO Incident. We're taking a deep dive today, and our guide is this really detailed Wikipedia article you shared. It covers, well, everything. The event itself back in '65, initial reports, what scientists thought, official statements, and how it's stuck around in popular culture.
Exactly. And our mission here is to sort of unpack the main facts from that source, look at the different explanations people came up with, and really dig into the mysteries that still surround Kecksburg.
Yeah, because what's really striking looking at the source is how you have this huge event seen by tons of people, but it quickly focuses down on this one little town, Kecksburg, and kicks off, well, decades of arguments.
Right. We'll trace it from that bright flash everyone saw to these really persistent claims about something. Well, so something solid, something weird being found down in the woods there.
Okay, let's get into it. It all starts December 9th, 1965, evening time. The source says people across, 6 U.S. states?
At least 6, yeah. And even up in Ontario, Canada. Specifically over the Detroit-Windsor area, they saw this massive, really brilliant fireball shooting across the sky.
And this wasn't just a faint streak, right? The source mentions reports of actual debris, hot metal falling,
Yeah.
grass fires starting.
Yeah, and sonic booms too, especially around Pittsburgh. It was pretty dramatic. Definitely got people's attention.
So naturally, scientists chime in pretty quickly. The source says early on, astronomers were thinking, okay, probably a meteor, a big one, a bolide, burning up as it came through the atmosphere.
Right, that was the standard thinking for something like that. Bright light breaking up seemed like a meteor entering at a steep angle. Makes sense, scientifically.
Then there's Kecksburg, this small village, maybe 30 miles out from Pittsburgh. While everyone else just saw the light show, folks in Kecksburg reported more.
A lot more. The source details these accounts, people seeing wisps of blue smoke hanging in the air after the fireball passed, feeling the ground shake, vibrations.
And hearing a distinct thump, like something actually hit the ground. They were convinced, weren't they, that it didn't just burn up, it crashed right there in the woods nearby.
Absolutely convinced. And that local certainty, according to your source, triggered a pretty major official response. Fast. The area where people thought it landed. Sealed off.
By who?
U.S. Army, State Police. Both involved. The source says they were setting up for a close inspection of whatever might be down there. State troopers, Air Force guys. They went into search.
Okay, so boots on the ground. What did they find in that first sweep?
According to the source material.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. That was the official word.
Huh. So initial statements from the DoD, the Air Force, they stuck to that.
Yep. They quickly ruled out a plane crash, missile, any known satellite coming down. They doubled down on the natural explanation, a meteor, maybe several meteors, and they made a point of saying all their planes and missiles were accounted for.
So the official line from the get-go was, big light show, reports of a crash, we looked, found zip, must have been a meteor burning up way high. End of story.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And that initial stance, focusing on a meteor, it lines up okay with some of the early science the source mentions, like Sky and Telescope magazine, February '66 issue.
What did they say?
They gathered reports, 23 from pilots alone, starting around 4:44 p.m. Eastern. And interestingly, a seismograph near Detroit picked up shockwaves around then, too.
Like an earthquake detector, picking up the fireball.
Kinda, yeah. Measuring ground shock.
Okay.
So they crunched the numbers and figured the path was roughly northwest to southeast. And crucially, they concluded it ended its flight in or near the western part of Lake Erie.
Lake Erie. Not Kecksburg.
Not according to Sky and Telescope.
Yeah.
But then the source brings up another study, 1967, from the Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. They also used that Detroit seismograph data, though they timed it slightly earlier, 4:43 p.m., and they used photos.
Photos of the fireball itself.
Exactly, to try and triangulate the trajectory, figure out the path more accurately.
And what did they conclude? Same as Sky and Telescope.
Similar, but different. They agreed it was coming down steep, but calculated the path as southwest to northeast, and their impact point. Also Lake Erie, but the northwestern shore near Windsor, Ontario.
Okay, so wait. Both early scientific papers point to Lake Erie, not the woods in Pennsylvania. But they don't even agree on the direction it was coming from. Northwest to southeast versus southwest to northeast.
Kind of messy, right? Both agree. Lake Erie finish. Both rule out Kecksburg. But yeah, conflicting trajectories. It adds a layer of, let's say, scientific uncertainty right from the start.
Which maybe helps explain why the story didn't just die there. especially when you jump way ahead, like the source does, to what happened much later with official
Oh,
statements.
yeah. Fast forward nearly 40 years, December 2005. Right before the 40th anniversary, NASA puts out this statement. And it really turned some heads.
What did they say?
They said their expert had actually examined metallic fragments from the Kecksburg area. And they've determined these pieces came from a Soviet satellite that re-entered and broke apart.
Whoa, hold on. A Soviet satellite. That's completely different from absolutely nothing found, and it was a meteor.
Completely different, big shift. But here's the kicker. The part that, according to the source, caused the most debate.
Let me guess.
They admitted the records. The actual analysis reports detailing which satellite,
Yeah.
what they found. Lost. Gone. Misplaced sometime in the 1980s.
Lost. How convenient. That sounds suspicious.
Well, it certainly fueled a lot of suspicion and frustration. The source mentions investigative reporter Leslie Keene even sued NASA under the Freedom of Information Act to try and force them to find those records.
Did it work?
It led to a court order in 2007 telling NASA to do a proper search. And during that process, NASA's public liaison officer, Steve McConnell, testified under oath that, yeah, 2 boxes of relevant papers from back then were missing.
2 whole boxes. Wow.
The source notes NASA tried to downplay it a bit, drawing a comparison to the lost Apollo 11 takes, basically saying, hey, losing stuff happens sometimes, even important stuff.
I guess, but still. Soviet satellite fragments found, then the proof vanishes. It feeds right into conspiracy theories, doesn't it?
It definitely does. And the source also presents pushback on that 2005 NASA story. Space writer James Oberg in 2008 was pretty skeptical.
What was his take?
He doubted NASA even had those records to lose. He suggested the NASA team back in '65 was probably Air Force guys pretending to be NASA, which he said was something they did sometimes back then for certain incidents. He basically called Keene's lawsuit a publicity stunt.
So Oberg thinks the whole NASA satellite story might have been misdirection or just wrong.
That seems to be his angle, yeah. And then, to make things even muddier, the source points to more recent NASA comments from their Space Object Catalog System, the NSSD Caucus Bar ID folks.
And what do they say now? Back to the satellite?
Nope. They seem to lean away from the satellite again. They acknowledge people speculate about Cosmos 96, that Soviet probe, but they say analysis of the photos and sightings shows the fireball's path was actually too steep for something re-entering from orbit like a satellite.
Too steep. So the trajectory doesn't fit a satellite.
According to this recent NASA take, no. They suggest it's more likely a meteor after all, coming in from the asteroid belt and ending its flight over. Guess where?
Lake Erie.
Western Lake Erie. Back to the original scientific conclusion almost. They also add that tracking data showed Cosmos 96's orbit decayed earlier than the Kecksburg sighting anyway.
So multiple reasons it likely wasn't Cosmos 96.
Right, and the source even mentions other analyses that apparently definitively rule out Cosmos 96. So the latest official-ish word seems to be probably a meteor ended over Lake Erie, definitely not Cosmos 96.
But there's always a but with Kecksburg, isn't there?
There is, because even as they lean back towards meteor over Lake Erie, the source says these recent NASA comments still make a point of acknowledging the unconfirmed reports that the thing landed near Kecksburg. They can't quite ignore the Kecksburg part of the story, even if there are data points elsewhere.
Because that's the part that just won't go away, the local story.
Exactly. It's those persistent, unconfirmed, but never forgotten reports of an actual landing in Kecksburg that took this from just a weird light show or a case of lost files into, well, ufology legend territory. The source calls it Pennsylvania's Roswell.
Okay, so let's pivot to that. The people on the ground in Kecksburg, what did they say they saw, according to the source? This is where it gets really specific, right?
Very specific. The source highlights stuff from like that 1990 Unsolved Mysteries episode. It really pushed the extraterrestrial angle, and it featured local residents.
What did they describe?
They talked about finding an object down in the woods. And it wasn't just a rock or random debris. They described a distinct shape, like an acorn.
An acorn.
Like the nut.
Yeah, or maybe bell-shaped, depending on who you ask or how you interpret acorn. But a specific manufactured-looking shape and size. They said about as big as a Volkswagen Beetle.
Okay, acorn or bell shape, VW size. Anything else?
Oh, yeah. The really strange part. Markings. They claimed had writing on it, but like nothing they recognized. The source quotes descriptions like resembling Egyptian hieroglyphs, or just unknown symbols.
Hieroglyphs. On an acorn-shaped thing in the woods.
That's the claim reported in the source. And these witnesses also insisted that this object, whatever it was, didn't stay there long. They claimed the military came in, quickly, secretly, and hauled it away.
Which directly contradicts the whole absolutely nothing found official line from 1965.
Directly. It paints a picture of a cover-up. Finding something weird, whisking it away, and telling the public it was just a meteor. That narrative, acorn bow shape, VW size, strange markings, military recovery, that's the heart of the Kecksburg legend.
And the source mentioned there's even a prop replica near the fire station now from the TV show.
Yep, shows how ingrained it is in the local identity. And the source also mentions a specific witness, John Hayes. He claimed on Unsolved Mysteries in a Sci-Fi Channel doc that he was a kid then, and he saw a flatbed truck coming out of the woods carrying something big, covered up about the size of.
A VW bug.
Exactly. His personal testimony adds another layer to that claim that something physical was recovered.
Now, the source also mentions some, let's say, weirder theories that popped up later, not just UFOs.
Yeah, it touches on how the story got picked up by shows like Nazi UFO Conspiracy or Ancient Aliens. They floated the idea it might have been the recovery of some secret Nazi device called Die Glock, the bell.
Ah, connecting the bell-shaped description to a Nazi superweapon theory. That's quite a leap.
It's definitely out there, a conspiracy theory layered onto the existing mystery. But the source also mentions more grounded, though still unproven, speculation.
Like what?
From groups like MUFON, or a guy named Owen Eichler. They suggested it could have been a General Electric Mark II reentry vehicle, basically a type of American spy satellite component that was used back then. Maybe one malfunctioned and fell.
So potentially a piece of known, but maybe classified, U.S. technology, not Soviet, not alien, not Nazi.
That's another possibility thrown into the mix, yeah. But, as the source stresses, it's still just speculation. Needs confirmation from NASA or the Air Force, which hasn't happened. Just another potential explanation for something potentially being found.
Okay, wow. Let's try and pull this together for you listening. We start with this massive fireball seen by tons of people that narrows down to Kecksburg, where locals swear something crashed.
Right. Then you have the initial official story. Nothing found, just a meteor. Early science agrees, mostly, points to Lake Erie, but can't even agree on the direction.
Then, decades later, NASA says, wait, we found Soviet satellite bits, but oops, lost the paperwork. Then, more recently, NASA leans back towards probably a meteor over Lake Erie, not that Soviet satellite, but they still kind of nod to the unconfirmed Kecksburg landing reports.
And running completely parallel to all that official back and forth and scientific debate, you have the unwavering local Kecksburg story. An acorn or bell-shaped object, size of a car, weird writing, hauled away by the military.
It's that clash, isn't it? The official scientific story pointing one way, mostly away from Kecksburg, towards natural or known phenomena with missing data, and the local testimony pointing somewhere completely different, describing something specific and anomalous being retrieved.
Exactly. And that's what the source really highlights here. Kecksburg shows you what happens when you have an event with no single, universally accepted answer. Especially when official accounts shift or records go missing, it becomes this Rorschach test almost.
Yeah, you can project almost anything onto it. A meteor, a secret satellite, Soviet or US, a UFO, even Nazi tech. It all comes down to which pieces of conflicting information you choose to believe, doesn't it?
It really underscores how vital critical thinking is when you're faced with incomplete or contradictory information about something unexplained. You have to weigh the sources, the evidence or lack thereof, and understand why different narratives persist.
That was quite a deep dive into the Kecksburg incident, threading together all those tangled lines from the source material you shared.
Indeed. It's a classic case, really. Widespread sightings, specific local claims, shifting official stories, lost evidence. It has all the ingredients for an enduring mystery.
So here's something to think about. Given everything we've just discussed, from the source, the meteor theory, the satellite theories, both Soviet and maybe U.S., the detailed witness accounts of a specific weird object, the lost NASA files, how do we even begin to evaluate a historical event like this? When the information is so fragmented, contradictory, maybe even deliberately obscured, what part of this whole tangled story stands out most to you? That is the end of this episode. Until next time, keep to the shadows. Some legends are best left undiscovered.